The leaves crunched as I walked along the vast, beautiful forest. The blinding sun shone ever so brightly in the sky, setting ever so slowly over the horizon. A breezy wind blew through the forest, singing a quiet song in my ears as I continued to walk. I could hear the sound of animals scurrying through the forest, giving life to the terrain that Mother Nature ever so graciously built. As I navigated my way through the forest, I looked around at all the shady trees as I jumped over all the logs that lay on the ground. I imagined the life each tree had had, how many people throughout history had walked the same path I was. Each tree was a story to be told, each as old as nature itself. I was a big thinker as a kid, always asking my parents questions about how the world worked. I was always in my head, wandering around the worlds that I created. Worlds of cities built with bright diamonds, fantasy lands where I was the hero of my own tale. Nature was my escape from everything. I would imagine myself fighting the ferocious beasts that I had created in my head, or that I was on an adventure to Mordor with Frodo. This time, I imagined I was walking on the Death Trail in search of an ancient treasure buried by Blackbeard himself. I fought devilish beasts whose teeth could destroy a whole tree with a single bite, a dragon whose eyes shined with crimson and breathed fire as hot as the sun. The forest was my favorite place to think, for this inviting evergreen forest was beautiful in every way. The sound of squirrels chattering could be heard as the birds sang their final song, for the sun was setting slowly on the horizon. Bright, vibrant colors filled the sky. The forest sparkled as sunlight crackled across the trees, lighting up the dirt path ahead of me, decorated with roots and flowers of many kinds. It was lively. The sound of scurrying could be heard on every side. The leaves and twigs crunched under my feet, and the branches hung as if they were welcoming me. I breathed gracefully, my body feeling a slight chill as I walked through the path. I was deep inside my imagination when the sound of water took me out of my thoughts. I always hated that sound. It meant that soon I'd have to turn back. I continued my way, trying to ignore the sound, but it was becoming increasingly harder as I reached the river. I slowed my pace, trying to prolong my journey back home. It wasn't long, though, until I saw the sparkling blue river, the sound of crashing water filling my ears as I reached my endpoint. I stopped and cleaned off my arms and hands from the dirt that always found its way onto my body. I felt the water flow through my hands as I looked through the water in the tree line. I would always turn back at the river, for my fear of drowning kept me at bay. I would sometimes walk along that river, dipping my hands into the water as I walked. Something in me didn't feel fear of the water that day, though. I felt adventurous. I contemplated as I looked beyond the river stream. There was a whole other part of the forest beyond it, new lands to be discovered. I looked up at the sky. The sun was almost over the horizon. I thought about being out here at night, thoughts of monsters and creatures capturing me. I remembered my stories, though, the hero who saved the world from danger. Suddenly, without a second thought, it was like my body just got up and began to jump on the rocks in the river. I felt the water on my feet as I stopped on each of the rocks before jumping to the next. Once I reached the other side, I quickly ran into the forest beyond. I walked along as I studied the trees to get a good idea of my surroundings to find my way back. I made landmarks on trees out of chalk and always carry some with me so I wouldn't get lost, something I always do when traveling new terrain. Something about this area felt off, though. It was as if Mother Nature had left, leaving her creations in ruin. It was a lot darker than I thought it would be. There were so many trees that it blocked out the sun. I was a fearless kid, though. I thought that I couldn't be harmed, for nature was my dearest friend. I was wrong, though, for no one is safe from the brutality of Mother Nature. Not even me. As I walked through the forest, I looked ahead to get a good map of the terrain in my head. Shadows gathered around the forest as the dark trees hung over me like limbs from an ancient world. There was an ominous silence that filled the woods. No sounds of animals running around, no crickets or frogs chirping, no wind twirling in my ears, just pure and utter silence. The only thing I could hear was the sound of leaves crunching underfoot as I walked. I noticed a tree that looked like a hideous witch, its gnarled limbs and black claws stretching over me, almost serving as a warning not to go any further. This was a tree that had died many years ago from the look of it, succumbing to nature's life cycle. I stared at it for a few minutes, feeling an uneasiness that crawled at the back of my throat. I continued my journey across the uncharted forest, but the tree stayed embedded in my mind. There was a feeling of dread that I fought off as my heart felt uneasy. The forest seemed dead, as if it was abandoned long ago. Stumps were scattered across the forest grounds. The clumps of bushes lay among the stumps. Twigs snapped from my feet. The brown trees were so close to each other, forming a thick canopy. It was barely bright enough for me to see ahead, yet I did not stop. There was a mixture of feelings that I felt I couldn't describe. One thing was for sure, though. It felt as if I was being watched. It was like the trees had eyes of their own and were watching me very closely. My senses widened, my skin tingling. I breathed deeply and listened with great intensity. My instincts were telling me that something was off, a deep feeling that crept over me like a beast. I kept looking behind me to make sure nothing was following me, scanning my surroundings with great efficiency. That's when something caught my eye. Straight ahead, deep in the forest, barely in eyesight, stood a tall, dark figure that peered at me from behind a tree. I was paralyzed in shock, gripped by the sudden strong urge of fear that froze my entire body as I stared at whatever was ahead of me. I couldn't make out any features. It was so dark that I couldn't see the mysterious figure clearly. It felt as though our eyes were locked together, but I couldn't even see its eyes. It felt like it was staring right through my soul. I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind, but everything in me told me otherwise. It just stood there, staring at me. My body couldn't move. I tried to, but my brain had just shut off. As I looked at this creature, everything about it just didn't seem right. Its arms were so long that one of them touched the ground. The other wrapped around the tree. Its head had a weird shape to it, as if it was stretched out. The creature stood incredibly tall. It had to be at least 9 feet. It was skinny, as if it was just pure bones and nothing else. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like two intelligent beings staring at each other. Somehow it felt even quieter than it had before, silence creeping down my whole body, paralyzing me. Everyone has a fight-or-flight reflex, but in some instances, when a human reaches a new level of fear they've never felt before, they just freeze. You try to move, but it's like you're being gripped by an invisible force, every instinct in you telling you to run, but you just can't. Even though I've fought every monster and beast in my head, when faced with real danger, I didn't fight. All I could feel was fear. Fear of the unknown, the certainty of death. A cold chill filled the air. Even with no wind, it got colder. My body violently shook, legs trembling with pure dread and fear. I felt the thing looking me up and down, as if it were studying me. Neither of us made a single move, as if it too was paralyzed. Sweat dripped down my face. I breathed heavily as a panic attack began to emerge out of the darkening pit of my hell, dragging me down as it threatened to devour me. Suddenly, the creature quickly disappeared behind the tree. The sudden movement caused my brain to snap out of its paralysis, and my legs started moving. It was like my primal instinct kicked in, instincts given to us from our primal ancestors. My mind was racing with thoughts as I wondered what it was I had just seen. I was trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, but everything in me told me that something was not right. I could hear my own heartbeat as it tried to claw its way up my chest. Keep going straight. Soon you should see a large tree that has vines wrapped around it. Once you reach that, turn right, and you should see a tree with white chalk. Keep running towards that until you see the stump that you almost fell over. Make another right and keep going forward, I thought to myself, mapping out the forest in my head. My skills of navigation have never helped me before like this, and I was running and thinking at such a speed that I was hurting both my head and my legs. I started to smell a foul stench, something that smelled like a rotten corpse. It filled the forest, and I nearly gagged once it poured into my nose. A clicking noise surrounded me, fast and animalistic. I started to hear something in the forest running behind me, footsteps sounding heavy and fast. I looked back for a second to see if I could see whatever was chasing me, but all I could see was the dark open forest. I looked back and continued my way towards the river. I weaved my way through the forest quickly, making sharp lefts and rights and turning my way back to safety. My legs felt like they were going to break. My heart was hammering at my chest as my lungs were set ablaze. I listened to the sound of running behind me. The clicking was even closer and louder than before. The smell even stronger and fouler. It, too, knew how to navigate the forest as I did, maybe even better. My skin felt cold as I shook to the point where I almost fell many times, but I always caught myself just in time. Make a sharp right turn once you reach the dead tree. Once you see the rock that stands tall, make a left and keep running straight. It was like my mind was on adrenaline too, thinking at such a pace that I never thought I could before. The running behind me sounded even closer, the stench even stronger. My legs felt as if they were going to break, yet my speed still stayed the same as I used every ounce of energy I had. A familiar sound filled my ears, a sound I've always hated and despised. It was the river. It was close. I ignored the pain I felt in my legs and continued to run as whatever was behind me was catching up. My heart was beating like a war drum. I was running off of pure adrenaline at this point. My chest felt as if someone was squeezing my internal organs together, my feet burning from the many blisters I had. I ignored it all, though, and continued to guide myself through the cruelty of Mother Nature. I began to see the river stream. I was approaching it rapidly. My legs felt numb, my lungs on fire as I breathed heavily out of the exhaustion of fear. It sounded like it was only a few feet behind me. I knew that if I didn't reach the river, then it would catch me soon. The clicking sound was basically right in my ear. The stench was so strong that I gagged. I used every ounce of energy I had to run even quicker, ignoring all the pain I felt in my body. I hurtled out of the forest once I reached the river and jumped my way across the rocks that stuck out, falling onto my knees once I reached the other side. I quickly got back up and began to run again. I didn't stop running until my body collapsed, not being able to move. I hadn't noticed that it had turned to night, a dark umbra surrounding the forest. I was too exhausted to move. Every breath struck my chest deep. Yet there was no sign of anything chasing me or this foul smell that had followed me. The sound of wind and nature filled my ears again, replacing the terrifying clicking noises. Tears began to slowly drip down my face, mixing with my sweat. I opened my mouth to let out a whimper that never came, too exhausted to even make a sound. I wanted to go home, back to where my mother was. I started to breathe even heavier, my heart beating so fast that it was like having a heart attack. Everything became fuzzy and blurry, my mind racing with thoughts that only made me panic worse. I shook rapidly. I felt gripped by a sudden force that squeezed my body tight. My chest pounded in pain. It felt as if everything was being smashed by a hammer. I felt an impending doom dragging me down into deep darkness, deeper than any pit of despair I'd ever known. I tried to catch my breath, but it was just too much for me. I thought that whatever chased me would find me and devour my very soul. Everything was so loud, it felt like I was trapped in a tornado. I felt like I was going to throw up from the dizziness. My muscles were tense. The world was spinning around me as my heart started to pound worse than it ever had before. The pain from my chest slowly spread to my shoulders, giving a sharp pain in both of them. I got chills all over my body, gripped in fear and anxiety that had its hold on me and wouldn't let go. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was going to die a gruesome and horrifying death. I looked at the night sky as if it was in the hands of death and noticed how beautiful it looked. The pale crescent moon shone like a silver claw in the night sky. I looked upon the vast sea of stars, shining so brightly like little diamonds in the sky. Everything slowly went quiet. It was like the earth stopped. I felt the summer green grass on my hands and looked at the trees that surrounded me. Fireflies filled the darkness, sparkling like precious, valuable stars in that dark place. The sound of crickets could be heard all around. chirping their song in replacement of the birds singing. My heart slowly started beating in a steady rhythm, and my breath slowed to a smooth pace. I breathed in a smell that was a woodsy fragrance, letting go of all my worries. It was as if Mother Nature cradled me in her arms, reassuring me that everything was all right. I felt a moment of tranquility, my mind silenced. I lay on the earth, admiring the beauty of the world around me. I slowly stood up, ignoring the pain I felt in my legs and chest. I welcomed back the blossoming, fragrant forest as I walked slowly through Mother Nature's creation. I began to walk home, admiring every inch of it that surrounded me. I always imagined the beautiful land in my head, landscapes of fantasy filled with bright colors. I never realized that I was already in a dazzling world, filled with so many mysteries to be discovered. The forest was breathtaking tonight, sparkling in the moonlight like little crystals. I wasn't in my head on the walk home. My mind was silent for a change. Brown trees stood tall. The flowers bloomed, engulfing the forest in a smell so lush and fresh. I thanked Mother Nature that night, for she taught me a lesson that I'll never forget. I'm not invincible. I'm no hero or great warrior. I'm just a child. Not every story needs a hero, and I don't have to be the hero in every story. I walked my way home, embracing the forest for the first time. Have you ever found something that's just incredible? Something so unreal, you can't help but wonder what event led to this item becoming intertwined with you. I'm not talking about a bottle cap or a piece of a plow. Hell, I'm not even talking about a pistol I found buried in the dirt when I was a kid. I'm talking about something mind-boggling. Not sure if that's the right word. Enough talking about it, though. Time to give you the story about my recent discovery. Most mornings during the fall, I deer hunt. Before you all jump down my throat about it, I only kill 2 a year. Only enough for me to eat. Times are tough, and a guy's gotta eat, you know? After I catch my 2, however, I still make my way out to my stand a few times a week. I enjoy sitting up there in the cool fall air, taking it all in. It's me and nature. No phones, no one, no real-life stuff. Plus, I enjoy seeing the deer, even if I'm not shooting at them. It was one of those days that I was sitting in the stand, taking in the sunrise when I heard it. Well, I guess I don't have to ask if that's the one that made the noise, I thought to myself, chuckling and betting with myself which tree fell this time. I'm sure it's that dead one that's right next to the fence this time. It's been on its last limbs for years. With my curiosity piqued and the sunrise over, I decided to climb down the stand and start my trek home. With my pack clinging to my shoulder and a pistol on my side, I made my way towards home while keeping an eye out for the fallen tree. Every tree I passed boosted my confidence in my assertion that the old dead tree finally gave way. Shortly after I find the old tree laying on its side, I take a little pride in my skill with assumptions. As I walk by, however, I notice that the tree is hollow on the inside, and the tree collapsed in on itself as it fell. Looking at the poor old tree, that's when I see it. The stump of the tree was not hollow. It's solid like a normal tree. Odd, I think. Termites must have gotten to it after it dried out. But the stump had something sitting inside of it. It's shards of some kind of pot. An old clay pot that was placed in this tree for a long time. Long enough for the tree to grow around it. How did that even happen? Thoroughly intrigued, I look through the pieces of the clay shattered in the stump, and the first thing that sticks out is it isn't clay. It's a piece of cloth, and a piece of thin rope around a circular piece of clay, which I presume was the top of the pot. The other eye-catching part of this is a large, round, flat piece of clay that appears to be the bottom of the pot. I know what you're thinking. Wow, pots have bottoms. What a fascinating thing to realize. Well, smartass, it's not that it's a bottom. Obviously, it has a bottom, but the symbol on the bottom is what caught my eye. A 5-pointed star with a tiny small star in each of the triangles of the star's end. A squiggly symbol, maybe meant to look like smoke if you squint at it just right. The engraving wasn't perfect. Still, it's a pretty interesting thing to put on the bottom of a clay pot. Even more so when you seal the pot with a cloth and put it in a tree. I decided to take it with me. At the very least, it would be an interesting trinket to show everyone at my dinner party. While putting the piece in my bag, one of the shards pricked my finger, letting a little drop of blood roll into the pack with the pieces. Once the house was in sight, I was thinking of one thing. Is this pot worth something? It's clear that this thing is a relic, so who's to say it's not valuable to some institution or study or museum or another? Unsure of what to make of something's value, I decided to examine the piece again and see if I can find any clues to help me identify who made this thing and what it is. My immediate guess was that it was Native American or something. Did they even have clay-making abilities? Adding that to the list of things to Google when I got home. After a thorough inspection, I can't find anything that sets this apart from a standard clay pot at any store that sells clay pots, other than its weathered exterior. As I sat looking at it, I tried to piece things together in my mind. My mind jumps to, it looks like a pot from Zelda, but something tells me it probably looks a little different, what with its lack of cell shading and all. After noticing that I've been staring at these pieces for hours, I decide it might be time to put some effort somewhere else for the rest of the day. Nothing bothers me about the puzzle that's unfinished. It sticks in the back of my mind all day, thinking about what it could be. As I lay down in bed that night, I'm still thinking about that damn pot with the symbol, and it just doesn't make any sense. As I drift off to sleep, I see myself in a dream. Myself in a bed. My point of view in the dream is from the bedroom ceiling. My body lays there, still softly breathing, in and out. That's when I see it, out of the corner of my eye. It's a figure. Short, pudgy man, slowly walking towards the bed. Not short, like short, like he couldn't see over the bed short. He waddled towards my unconscious body, all the while chanting, "I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming." Panicked, but unable to do anything, I watch as he puts his chubby little hand on the foot of my bed and pulls himself up. He peeks up onto the bed, and I feel violated as he looks at me, scanning my body with some kind of pleasure in his eye. I say eye because he only has the one in the middle of his round thumb head. Right as he's getting on top of me, he turns to look at me. Not the me in the bed, but the me in the ceiling, watching the horror unfold, all the while continuing to whisper. Leaping out of my bed, I realized it was only a dream. Wiping the sweat off my face and trying to catch my breath, my throat screams in pain and feels like I've swallowed a razor blade. Like I had my mouth open all night. Nothing some cough medicine wouldn't fix, I supposed. I jumped in the shower because I guess in all the excitement over the pot I forgot to take one last night and had dirt all over my clothes. Not even sure where I'd picked up that much dirt. Onward the day goes as I try to get this damn pot out of my head when it dawns on me. My brother was a history major in college. Maybe he'd know something about it. I take a picture of the symbol and give him a brief synopsis on what happened. It's almost no time before he texts me back, asking if I'm being for real. Why would I make this up? I reply back, annoyed at him obviously knowing something and not telling me. I can't be 100% sure, but from the evidence, I would say you found a witching pot, brother. Don't keep me in suspense. You know I don't have a clue what you're talking about. It's a pot for witch catching, you muggle. I'm serious, Zeke. Tell me what this thing is, please. Okay, I'm just messing with you. It's an ancient tradition that goes all the way back to the Romans, I think. When bad stuff was happening, they would do some kind of ritual and trap the insert bad thing here into the pot. Like Ganon, basically. That's encouraging, but I don't think the Romans were chilling in America. It goes back to the Romans, but the tradition has been around for all kinds of civilizations. African tribes, Chinese, Vikings, basically any civilization you can think of has something similar to it. Logically, the Native Americans probably did the exact same thing. They would make a container for evil forces and put the symbol of the earth spirit on the bottom of the container. I guess it worked like a magnet to lure it in. The thing usually gets trapped in the container and happily ever after for the good people. Okay, that doesn't really help, but at least I know what it is now. Thanks. Let me know if any evil spirits run around your house. So, as you probably guess, I wasn't really concerned about this, but it did make me a little unnerved, given the dream I'd had. Everything he said made some kind of sense. The symbol at the bottom was some kind of witch, demon, or hell, maybe some disease that was running through the people. They sealed the pot up with cloth and set it on the altar or something made out of the tree. Some years later, you get a tree with a pot in it. My throat continued to burn throughout the day with no help from the medicine. I finally stopped fighting it, and after a few hours, I went back to bed, hoping to sleep it off. I woke up from an apparent nightmare that I can't remember having, but I do recognize that I'm talking as I awake. I hear myself mutter, "I'm here," but I don't have time to think about it before it hits me. Pain. Hot, sharp pain runs through my arms. That's when I realize I'm standing in my living room, over my living room table, the table with the pot. Except I've used the piece in my hand to carve a 5-pointed star on my forearm. I drop the shard of bloody clay and run to the bathroom to get a towel. It's only skin deep, but I'm bleeding like a son of a gun. As the bleeding stops, my mind catches up to the last few minutes of my life. I was carving that symbol into my arm. Why the hell was I doing that? I decided the pot was going in the trash. Bagging it up, I walked out the door with the clay remains. Still, my mind was coming back to what my brother had said. It was used to trap something bad. It was holding something bad, and the tree falling broke its prison. And there I went, stumbling along like an unlucky penny I am, and picked up the pot. He's coming. My unconscious mind tried to warn me of what was happening. Too dumb to realize, though. As I walked back in the house from throwing the pot in the trash, that was when I realized it. I was still holding the bag in my hand. I hadn't done anything with it. I can't make my hand let go. It won't let go of the bag. No matter how hard I tried, it won't let go. Not even when I jabbed at the star-shaped cut in my arm. Trembling with pain, it still held on. I got back to the table, and my arm seemed to work as normal as it dropped the pieces back where they'd been. I decided to write this all out, because what else am I going to do? I can't leave or fight. How can I fight something living in my body? I wanted to see my brother, but I can't. I won't do that to him. I'm not going to put him at risk if this thing can go from me to him. No way. Of course, I don't know if that's how this works at all, or if he goes wherever he wants to. Whoever reads this shall be my plaything. I picture it saying that as it watches me type this out. Hell, maybe it's even making me type this out. Maybe this is what he wants. Maybe it thrives off people knowing about him and being scared of him. I'm talking crazy now. I just wanted to tell you guys what happened so you know if you find something similar. I don't know what you could do to avoid it, obviously, so I guess I really don't have a point to writing this. Actually, when did I decide to write this? How long have I been writing this? I don't even remember the things here happening at all. I was just walking back from hunting and I saw that a tree had fallen. What's going on? I know I can't stop myself from posting this because it's not me actually typing. It's gotta be him. I'd say don't read this, but since this is the end, I'm assuming you already have. I'm sorry for that. Honestly, maybe nothing will happen to you, but if it does, I can't help but think of my own preservation and wonder if he'll leave me alone if he jumps to someone else. I can't stop from posting this if I wanted to anyway, so I guess I'll hope for the best. I think I'm fixing to go back to sleep, and this might be the last time. I'm sorry to whoever sees this, but I think he's here. I remember when playing behind my house was an endless exploration of imaginative adventures that could only further inspire my 8-year-old mind. Many times I was a barbarian warrior, like Conan, lopping off hands with my enchanted tree branch. The evil beasts conjured up in my mind stood no chance against my strength and wit, my lust for action and romantic adventure. However, I now realized just how close my world was to intertwining with the Sumerian, his fiction. For many years, the tales of sword and sorcery described monsters of unfathomable terror. Oh, such only brute force and unwavering mind of a fearless warrior could encounter and hope to defeat them. I was not this warrior, yet my discovery of a hidden terror seemed to be destined for me to find. For when I wandered off the set path which led from mine to my grandparents' house, I stumbled across a shaded patch of forest with a small, murky pond at its center. The area was dead quiet, save for the crunching of dead leaves beneath my feet and the occasional nerve-wracking pop of breaking twigs. I remember a slight fog over the water, more like a vapor dissipating, as if the pond was boiling. Yet, being an ignorant youth, I reached down and touched the surface and felt it was very cold. So much so that I drew my hand back in surprise, only to begin violently wiping my fingers on my clothes, for the liquid was like some sort of sticky alcohol. With the commotion I made, I heard across the water a soft rustling that seemed to be heading around the pond in my direction, but I stopped once I glanced towards it. For all my fear of the sound, my eyes suddenly came across a shape in the center of the pond. It was like a pale, smooth limestone, yet from it came a small, delicate trail of bubbles, escaping from an unseen pocket of air. Stupidly, I started to lean forward, squinting for a better look. I fell, my body submerging in the cold burning of the foggy liquid. I desperately tried to place my feet on whatever ground I could find, but there was none. I kicked and thrashed towards the surface, not wanting to open my eyes for fear of the liquid blinding me. Suddenly, I felt one of my feet strike something hard. The limestone, maybe? But in response, there came a sound, a low grunt of some kind. The pond began to build up a slight current, and, as if returning the favor, a sharp pain hit my thigh. I screamed into the mysterious water, and put all of my effort into reaching the shore of what now seemed to be an infinite ocean. I was no longer Conan as I breached the surface. I was a child crying out for his parents, smothering from the fumes of this potentially poisonous body of a creature-infested water. I climbed out after what seemed an eternity of an unwaking nightmare, and refused to look back as I ran from the pond. I expected to hear the sound of a monster breaching the pond's surface, but the silence of the dark woods remained unbroken. The vapors of the dry liquid trailed behind me as I desperately made for the familiar path. When it was in sight, I felt the calmness of familiarity which caused me to slow my pace. The world was luminous with the summer evening, and the creatures of common knowledge went about their business, ignorant of what I had found. When I reached home, I wondered if I had only dreamed up another fantastic story in which I had encountered the pond. There was no scent of the strange water, no more burning on my skin, but the fear in my heart returned as I looked down at my torn jeans and spied a coagulation of blood from a long scratch on my flesh. I hurried inside and tossed my clothes into the hamper, showering for good measure, unintentionally earning praise from my mother for being on top of my hygiene. I told my parents nothing about the pond or the scratch, but I couldn't completely hide my fearful glances to the window facing the edge of the forest during dinner. The question didn't come. All was normal within our house, which made me more and more at ease, as well as conscious of my illogical perception. The evening went on with my dad and I watching reruns of Star Trek, while my mom read one of her awful Amish-based novels in the lamplight. I look back on this time to comfort myself, given what was to follow. I was tucked into bed by my loving parents. Being an only child at the time, I was coddled quite a bit. The bedroom was alight with glow and dark stars, posters of Star Wars, shelves of action figures ready to defend me while I slumbered. The light of my aquarium and the shadow of the angelfish gliding on the wall eased me into a near doze, until the bubbles from the pump caused me to open my eyes in fear. Suddenly, as if responding to my fearful pondering, I heard a scratching in the vent near the right side of my bed. A soft clinking followed by breathing, as if something small was making a great effort to get through the grate. I was terrified. My hopes that my imagination from my playful excursions of the day had overtaken my senses were dashed. Yet, the delusion refused to let loose its prisoner, which was my sanity. I knew I had to face it to prove its non-existence, so that logic could once again have dominion. "Hello?" I asked of the darkness. Immediately, the noise ceased, and in my mind's eye, I could see a rat scurrying away in fear of its discovery. But it was my contribution to this fable that was dismissed instead. "You found it, boy," came the whisper of a tiny creature behind the grate. My eyes welled with tears at the sound. I was about to call out to my parents when it continued. "All this time I tried to keep it hidden from the short nose, and a runt such as yourself seems compelled to find it and wake it up." The voice was irritated, yet it also contained a fear in its reverence. "What was it?" I asked, in a trembling voice. My aquarium bubbled quietly, reminding me of the pale shape in the pond. "It is a manticore, one that has hibernated for many human lifetimes, but has ended far more. I was entrusted to watch over it by the one who placed it in the prison. You stirred it. Now it will soon awaken." As I rose up in bed, I forgot my fear of disturbing circumstances and speaking with hidden things. I knew what a manticore was. I knew it well enough to have it far from my mind to dream up during my woodland adventures, for the image of the creature caused real fear in me, though in a hypothetical sense. The image I had seen in books of monsters went through my brain and disturbed me anew. Now I realized that I had been scratched by the thing's relentless claws. Had I opened my eyes while submerged in the pond, I knew that I would have gone mad to see the shape within the burning fog. "What can I do?" I asked. It didn't respond, yet I could still hear it breathing in the vent. "Please, I didn't mean to wake it up," I whimpered. I was trembling beneath the bed sheets, which used to make me feel safe. Now I only felt cold and alone, guilty for bringing such a thing into this world. "You cannot put it back to sleep. It's been too long now, and it'll be hungry. You cannot hurt it with any weapon, for its flesh is invulnerable. It can eat you whole, and it'll leave no bones behind. Its roar is terrible, boy. Your mother, your father, will wake up to the sound of it, and will be taken by madness once it enters your home. It will devour your neighbors, all who dwell nearby, and no one will know what's happened to any of you." I fell out of my bed and onto the floor, sobbing. I crawled to the vent and put my face down to it, without fear of what might happen. "What can I do?" I implored. "How can I kill it?" In the grate, I could see a tiny shape stirring within, 2 glimmers of silver light peering at me, and I could see the green flesh of a long, pointed nose. It was a goblin, small and mischievous looking, though at the moment the eyes looked sad and pitying. When it spoke for the final time, I sensed the want of a brighter circumstance. "If you wish to truly be the hero you pretend to be, you must slay it through its mouth." The eyes disappeared, and a soft, scrabbling shape faded into the darkness. I was alone with this frightening knowledge, and I had to make a choice. Should I return to my bed and risk waking up to the roar of the manticore, or did I face it that very night, in the strange waters that it lay beneath? I was a child. I was scared, but I knew I couldn't let my family and my neighbors be devoured because of what I had done. I dressed, grabbed a flashlight and a small family picture propped up on the table next to my bed, then quietly went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the rack. With my weapon in hand, I went out the back door to the swaying trees of a windy midnight. I started up the path with an empty mind, neither allowing terrible imagery nor doubting logic to hinder my strides. I wasn't brave, but I wasn't foolish. I simply was. The reality, or at least my perception of it, had been shattered into shapeless pieces of mirror that, no matter how well formed, could never show my reflection in its former naivete. I prayed that I wouldn't find the pond, but I knew for sure that I would. The shape would be there. I would have to go back into the water and somehow open the mouth of the manticore and shove my feeble knife into it. This was my plight. I was 8 years old, on an adventure in my favorite place to pretend, and I could feel a laughing mockery of my innocence when I left the path once more. There was no sound but the wind and the trees. A crescent moon in a star-filled sky watched me from afar. I held my family picture to my chest and watched the hills of dead leaves. The beam of my flashlight shone through the trees, who almost seemed lonely in this path. In true, this was a world left behind a long, long time ago, when fairies took flight, and in the gardens of elves, dryads danced for satyrs piping tunes. Whatever creatures flourished in this pocket of time so close to my home were long since devoured by the manticore. Likely whatever force imprisoned the beast also sent it here to our plane, as well as having the courtesy of leaving a goblin behind to watch over it, no doubt. I finally saw the pond reflecting its murky grayness with my flashlight, and my soul cried out within me as a cold fear enveloped my body. There were no more vapors floating on the surface. Neither was there a pale shape below. It was still and empty. The thoughts now began to race, both logical and fantastical. It was gone. It was never there. I can return to my warm bed and forget about it. It will be there waiting for me in the midst of my parents' innards. I wanted to scream for all the emotions, but it was the manticore that screamed into the night, sending a terrible jolt through my body. My bowels cramped at the sight of the giant face of a human hovering 10 feet in the air. The paws of an enormous lion's body thudded to the ground, the wings on its back flapping a gust that almost made me topple over. The barbed, porcupine-like tail flicked violently left to right, taking out a tree with one careless swipe. The eyes were large and bulging, yellow with black gashes for feline pupils. When my eyes met that of the monster's, it screamed again in satisfaction at its discovery of its first meal after so long its slumber. I could see its 3 rows of teeth as it howled at me, and yet, somehow my only thought was, my parents are hearing this, and they're going to find out that I'm out of bed. They're going to look for me. They won't find me. I've been swallowed whole. When the manticore reached out to me, it stopped and gazed down at my tiny form and did something that finally snapped me out of my insane stupor. It grinned. The monster was grinning at my fear. The teeth were sharp and yellow. The stench of its breath broke through each of them and made me almost vomit. Stagnation of time, the willingness of its stomach acid to return to its labor. The manticore was ready to indulge itself. It breathed in through its nostrils, then opened its mouth and slowly came down over my head. Yet, somehow, instead of succumbing to terror, a white-hot hatred took over. I was offended at how weak it perceived me. I was irritated at how much of a bully this thing was. This freak of nature had thrown its weight around eons ago and eradicated the peaceful world in which I lived. I refused to let this happen again. Not to my family, my neighbors, and certainly not to me. I stepped on the first layer of its teeth and stabbed the knife into its tongue. It screamed and began to try to close its jaws on me, but I had already climbed further in and now sank my knife into the roof of its mouth. The beast thrashed its head, trying to sling me out, but I kept climbing further in, slicing and stabbing all the way through. I remember the barbarous man of action that I pretended to be, and I embraced it fully, burrowing deep into its throat, spitting blood from my own mouth as I climbed. By the sudden change in its equilibrium, I could tell it had fallen to the ground and was struggling against the pain. I pressed my feet against the back of its throat and shoved my knife deep into its skull. I couldn't penetrate it, so I began to cut upward as hard as I could. Its screams were deafening, but I knew that it could hear my laughter as I sliced and mangled without mercy. Suddenly, I was drowned in cold, burning water from the pond, along with fresh screaming as it mingled with the manticore's wounds. I lost my knife in the flood, but not my footing, or the family picture in my hand. I kissed it, then smashed the glass in the frame and shoved it into the open gash as hard as I could. The monster bellowed and suddenly began to whine pitifully. The thrashing ceased, and the water flowed inside until I was completely submerged. I began to swim out of the mouth, fearful of the teeth, but desperate to get out. My eyes burned horridly, and all the vision I had darkened from the night, so I felt my way past the teeth to the surface. Through the burning, I could make out the flashlight, which lay on the ground, and I swam towards it, fearing the claws of the beast seizing me and pulling me under. Suddenly there were small hands grabbing my arms and helping me out of the pond. It was the goblin, though I could barely see its shape. "You did it, boy! You did it! You slew the manticore!" I was confused. All the effort I put forth to hurt the creature still hadn't been enough to kill it. The goblin continued to bellow his claim, and I expected any moment that the thing would come back up and chomp us both. Yet the creature was silent. I could see now that it had plunged head first into the pond and drowned itself. It's really dead?" I asked. "Poisoned. The water is deadly to manticores that ingest it, which is why it was put here to sleep. But they can hold their breath for a long time. You made it drink the water to relieve the torture, and now its innards will burn away." I fell back and watched the star-filled sky. A meteor passed, and with it went my wish to always have this bravery that overcame my impossible fear. As the years progressed in my life, I found myself abandoning my imagination, my thoughts of heroism, but I always remembered the moment when I accepted my new reality at the edge of the pond. I'd been living in my house for about a year before the knocking started. It didn't happen often, probably once every 6 to 8 weeks. They would only be 1 or 2 knocks each time, and they always came from the woods behind my house. I never got a close-up view of what made them. Were always obscured by the trees or other cover. It was broadly sized, a solid, dark color, and appeared to stand upright. I nicknamed it Whoop, because that's exactly how the weird call it seemed to make sounded. I definitely heard it whooping more often than knocking. I'd always try to answer, but could never get another reply. Now, I'm sure I know what you're thinking, and before all this happened, I never thought of or knew much about anything like Bigfoot or ghosts or the paranormal. And to reiterate, I still don't know what whoop even is, because I never got an actual clear visual. If anything like that existed, I thought it just added more mystery to the world. I came out here to live a quiet, simple life. I don't want fame, attention, or publicity, and figuring Whoop wanted the same. Provided we keep our boundaries, I thought the two of us could have a peaceful coexistence. Shortly after the knocking began, my garden and animal pens started getting raided at night. It only happened once every so often, but something would pillage my crops, my fruit trees, even steal 1 or 2 of my farm animals. My garden and pens kept all kinds of animals of all sizes. This was the first time I'd ever had a problem, but since whatever was doing this managed to slip in and slip out with ease, I quickly realized that it was Whoop. I tried using trail cameras to catch an image of it, and maybe act as a bit of a deterrent. It worked at first, but Whoop eventually found a way around the cameras, and, if it had to, it smashed or knocked them off the post. After this happened a few more times, it became evident that Whoop's nighttime visits occurred on the same day I heard the knocking. Discovering this correlation made me pay close attention to the details of Whoop's nocturnal marauding, which made me notice another pattern. It always either ransacked the garden or the animal pens, and never did both on the same night. When I aligned the number of knocks I heard each time, and which section was subsequently raided, another pattern became clear. 1 knock meant gardens. 2 knocks meant pens. The knocks, I thought, have to mean it was hungry, and whether it wanted a carnivorous or herbivorous meal. The next time I heard Whoop knocking, I put that theory to the test. It was a single loud knock that came around dusk, and was actually followed by a quick whoop about 15 minutes later. 1 knock should mean garden, so I filled a bowl with fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts, and laid it out on a large flat rock about 20 yards from the tree line. I was hoping an offering like this would be my way of letting Whoop know I understood its message, and it would turn away from the garden. Sure enough, it worked. I saw no sign of any disturbance in my garden the next morning, and everything I left for it on the rock was gone. This became my protocol whenever I heard the knocking, and it worked every time. Then, a few months later, my boyfriend Jesse moved in with me, and the knocking stopped. Nothing happened for about 5 to 6 months, and I figured Whoop must have just left the area. I told Jesse about the knocking, and the offerings I left for it. Naturally, he was skeptical about it, and when nothing happened those first few months after he moved in, it was hard to not blame him for thinking I was just crazy. Then, out of nowhere, the knocking resumed. I was sitting on my back porch one evening, admiring the diamond necklace Jesse surprised me with when he came home earlier that day. It had a silver chain and a heart-shaped diamond charm that was light pink in color with gold earrings, and glimmered wondrously in the sunset. I actually jumped upon hearing the knock. It was clear as day, and coming no more than 50 feet from inside the tree line. I should have been delighted to hear a sign from Whoop, but something was oddly different about these knocks. Something that just didn't sit right. This time, there were three. 3 deep, hollow-sounding knocks. The first 2 were practically back-to-back, but the third came a few seconds later, throwing me off my guard. Whoop never knocked 3 times. What did that mean? What did 3 mean? Hoping to cover all my bases, I laid out a spread of fruits, vegetables, even fish, sweets, and other random items on the offering rock. Jesse didn't hear the knocking when it happened, but played along anyway, despite emphatically reiterating his skepticism. When I woke up the next morning, there didn't seem to be any disturbance in the garden or the pens. It looked like my offering worked, or so I thought. Upon stepping outside, I spotted something on my back patio. A large clump of knotty, thick, dark brown hair that I noticed had a streak of pink highlighting it. I went to pick it up, but immediately dropped it and stumbled back into the kitchen, struggling to maintain my balance while comprehending what I had just saw. There was more than just hair in that clump. It was an entire human scalp. I sprung into the living room to get Jesse and spilled onto the floor upon entering. I could only frantically point towards the kitchen back door and sputter panicked gibberish until Jesse managed to calm my nerves by firmly holding me in place. There, out there, the patio it's something. I couldn't even make complete sentences. Hair! The hair! Jesse looked more confused than worried. He got me onto the couch, saying he'd check it out, but wanted me to stay put until he returned. I heard Jesse open the kitchen door and step outside, where he remained for about 5 minutes, which to me felt like hours. I was flooded with relief upon hearing Jesse step back inside and make his way down the hall, but he gave me an answer I didn't expect. "There's nothing out there. What exactly did you see?" Jesse said as he entered the living room. Despite what he said, Jesse's face had almost no color, and he wore his flustered, petrified expression like he had just seen a ghost. The worry on Jesse's face made me feel horrible for scaring him like this, but there was no disputing what I'd seen. "Jesse, when I went outside, there was a clump of hair out on the patio," I shakily replied. "Not just hair, but an entire human scalp. It was placed there by something." I brought up calling the police, but Jesse quickly interjected. "What are you going to tell them? The thing that lives in the woods behind your house put a human scalp on your back porch? Then, what, took it back?" Jesse asked with a notable tinge of sarcasm. "Even if they didn't think you were crazy, they can't do anything without proof, and according to you, it vanished." Jesse wasn't fond of the law, but he made a point. Despite my reluctance, I went back outside with him to poke around, but found no trace of a human scalp. It was moved, I thought. There was only one animal around here that could have done it with such impeccable covertness, and if that was the case, the prospect of being able to get that close without me knowing still keeps me up at night. When I checked the offering rock, nothing I left out was touched, which made me even more unsettled. Jesse tried convincing me I mistook it for something else, but again, I knew what I saw. Jesse managed to put me down for a nap later that day. It was dusk when I woke up, and despite regaining some composure, I felt no less on edge. The house, I noticed, contained an eerie stillness. I called for him, but he didn't respond. I went downstairs and found a note from Jesse in the kitchen, saying he had to make an emergency shipment for work and would be gone for a few days. Jesse was a truck driver. He travels a lot, so last-minute jobs springing up like this are nothing uncommon. I tried to call his phone, but it went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual since reception out of town was subpar at best, and stayed like that for quite a while. Nonetheless, I was now completely alone in the house, and at a time when the last thing I wanted to be was by myself. I thought about leaving, but it was already dark, and I didn't even feel comfortable venturing beyond the front door. Before going to bed, I made sure that every light in the house was on, and an opening or entrance was closed and locked. Remarkably, the night passed without incident. Although the next few days were uneventful, I still couldn't get in touch with Jesse. Whenever I called him, his phone went straight to voicemail. Although he claimed not to find anything, the expression on Jesse's face that morning said differently. I feared Jesse actually saw the severed scalp, maybe even caught a glimpse of Whoop, and was so spooked it made him leave. Most of his belongings were still here, though, and it was too uncharacteristic of him to be unreachable, so I was assuming the worst. While trying to make sense of Jesse's abrupt departure, I continued obsessing over Whoop's gruesome gift, and a few days later, the questions I had some answers. The police showed up one morning and said they had to use my backyard so they could access a crime scene in the woods. Turns out some hikers stumbled across 5 bodies at the bottom of a ravine, about a mile away from my house. Investigators said the bodies were initially buried, but got dug up by some kind of large animal. It not only exhumed all 5 corpses, but apparently ate and dismembered large sections of the bodies. I was certain that Whoop had committed these grisly killings, and my suspicions were confirmed after seeing a photo of one of the victims. Her name was Heather. She'd been missing for about 2 months. She had a pretty face with gleaming green eyes and beautiful brown hair, which contained a prominent pink highlight streak. That human scalp I found the other day, it belonged to a woman. But then, the case took a very different turn. Despite the body's battered conditions, investigators managed to identify all 5 victims. They were mostly prostitutes, junkies, and drifters. They were all from different parts of the country and had no connection to our town or the surrounding area. Autopsies revealed every one of them had died from strangulation or blunt force trauma, which to me still implicated Whoop. There still had to be some sort of underlying connection, explaining why these victims wound up here of all places, and I found that link when looking at the picture of another victim. When I saw it, my feet almost buckled. The necklace that woman had worn in the photo, silver chain with a heart-shaped pink diamond and gold edges, was the same one I'd got from Jesse. Whoop hadn't killed those people. It was Jesse. I went to the police and told them about the necklace, but didn't say anything about the human scalp. They searched my house and found a stash of random items belonging to all 5 victims, which they said were probably trophies Jesse kept as mementos, likely as a way to remember the murders. I never heard from Jesse again. He's still at large. Detectives think he could also be behind some other unsolved disappearances and murders that happened in the spots along the trucking route. They're still investigating. Once I put the pieces together, I painted a macabre picture. Jesse, my boyfriend, killed 5 people. He must have encountered them along his trucking route and brought the bodies back here to be buried. It's unclear if Jesse held them captive before killing them, or did it immediately and hauled their corpses around, both of which are equally disturbing scenarios. Looking back at the day Jesse left, I think he did see the human scalp, and disposed of it himself after realizing it came from one of his victims. Jesse fled, but only to avoid getting caught. Whoop was the catalyst behind his departure, but not because it was trying to protect or give me a warning. It just wanted to eat. Whoop must have come across Jesse's burial site on its own, or followed Jesse during one of his drop-offs. This also made me realize what the 3 knocks had meant. It was hungry for human meat. After eating those bodies, Whoop must have developed a taste for human flesh, and here's why I'm certain that's the case. One night last weekend, a solo camper went missing in the same stretch of woods behind my house. On the same evening of her disappearance, I heard 3 loud knocks coming from the woods. Can anybody explain what happened to me? I'm 27 years old, female, and I love being outside. The woods is where I feel at home. I've been camping out alone in the woods several times, and I'm an avid outdoors woman. Now, on to my story. It's summer 2018. The temperature was high, and I just needed to be outside. I was going to camp out in the forest. I've only been to one time before. It's beautiful, and there are a lot of places that people never go. I've heard about this pretty waterfall that I was going to try to find. The maps are a bit unclear, and I couldn't find much about the location, but I was going to try to find it. It was Friday, and I'd packed all my gear. I had my tent packed, but I thought maybe I'd sleep out under the sky. Of course, it could be hot, so sleeping inside a tent wouldn't be so great anyway. It was 8 a.m., and I'd arrived at the parking lot. I parked my car and started to unload my stuff. I suddenly got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. I acted like nothing was wrong, and then I turned around really fast to see if someone was watching me. To my surprise, there was no one. I was all alone. So I started to listen, and I thought I heard a sound. My breathing was fast. Why do I suddenly feel so scared? I've never been scared. I've done this so many times. What could possibly be the reason for me to feel like this? I shrugged and turned around to collect the rest of my things. I started walking down the path while I looked at the map. I noticed that the map was a little old, so maybe it's a bit different now. I'd bought a new map, but I must have packed the old one instead. Well, I'd find this waterfall no matter what. After about an hour of walking, I found a little path. It was barely there, but I could see it. I started following it, and there's a lot of obstacles blocking the way, but I managed to navigate through them. Another hour, and I heard the sound of a waterfall. I began to smile. I was close now. Shortly after I found the waterfall, I was in awe of how magical it was. Is this even real? I took some pictures, and I started to set my camp up. I'm not setting the tent up. I'm going to sleep under the open sky. I had a lot of canned food with me, because the forest is so dry in the summer, so starting a fire is dangerous. I looked through my things and realized I forgot my gun. I only have my hunting knife. Darn, I wish I hadn't forgot it at home. I spent the rest of the day at the waterfall, and I didn't see or hear anyone. I was utterly alone the whole time. As the sky got darker, I started getting ready for bed. Tomorrow was a new day, and I was going to hike the area. The day passes fast, and soon it was night. I lay on my sleeping pad, and just as I'm falling asleep, I heard something. I didn't know what it was, but it makes my heart start pounding. I get this feeling of being watched again. I find my flashlight and start looking around. I look at my phone, but I have no service. I start to panic. I turned my flashlight off and started to listen. There's no sound. None at all. It's just so quiet. I've never heard a forest so silent. Then I hear a branch crack suddenly. Then silence again. I get my knife and I listen intensely, and then I hear it again. A branch breaking. Something's close, and it's sneaking closer. The only thing I can hear are my heartbeat and my breath. I sit there listening for several minutes, but nothing happens. An hour later, I haven't heard anything. I'm scared. My heart's beating so fast, but after some time, I managed to fall asleep. I wanted to set the tent up, but it was so dark, and I didn't have time for it now. 3:33 a.m., I wake up again, bathed in sweat, and once again I feel like I'm being watched. I start fumbling around for my flashlight, but I can't find it. I panicked, but then I found it. It's 20 inches away from me, but how did it get that far away? I turned the light on and looked around, and then I realized my knife was gone. I shone the light around on the ground. I see something. I look closer, but what is that? My body freezes. Right there, it's a message written in the dirt. The words, "I see you, but you can't see me." I just stare at it, thinking something was here. While I slept, something was this close to me, and now I don't have anything to protect myself with. Then I hear it again in the distance. Someone's whistling and humming. Then it stops, and it's replaced with hysterical laughter. My body's shaking. Someone's mocking me, and they have my knife. I'm sweating so much, but I feel so cold. I start to think about my family. What would they think if I never came home? Are they ever going to find me if this thing kills me? Do I regret anything? Why did I go into this forest when I'd already felt something in the parking lot? Why didn't I listen to my gut? My body was trying to warn me, and I was so stupid. My thoughts kept running through my head. I see my life passing before my eyes, but then I feel a high in my body. It's riseling through my body, and suddenly, I want to run. If this thing's going to kill me, I'm not going to go out without a fight. I stood up and just started running. I'm falling over things onto the ground, but I just keep running. The laughing comes closer, and I can hear it as I'm being followed by someone or something. I hit my head, I scrape my legs. They hurt, but I just keep running. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm praying that I get out alive. It's only a few feet behind me now. It's getting closer. Every second that passes by, I'm crying, and I keep thinking about my family. I don't want to leave them behind. It's going to reach me any second now. It's so close I can hear its breath. It's not laughing anymore. It's just breathing, heavy and slow, like it's not hard at all. If it wanted, it could just take me right now. But it doesn't touch me. It's right behind me, and I'm just running for my life. And then I tripped, and I fell on the ground. And as long as I was there, no more than a few seconds, I knew it was over. I was not going to survive this. I turned around and looked up, shining my light over my head, and I could feel the breath on my cheek, but I couldn't see anything. Then I hear a whistling right above my head. I can smell it. I'm gagging, and I'm crying, and I'm begging for my life. Then I blacked out. When I opened my eyes, the sun was rising. I'm bleeding from my legs and my head, but I was alive. I looked around, and I was alone, but I can hear a car. I must be close to the parking lot. I got up and started following the sound of the car. When I got to the road, I could see it coming towards me, and I flagged it down. It's a kind woman, and she stopped her car and asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I'm just crying, and then she asks me, "Are you Maria?" I look at her and just nod. How did she know my name? She asked if I was aware that I'd been missing for 7 days. I looked at her, confused. How can I have been missing for 7 days? I've only been in the woods since yesterday. She calls someone, and a police car comes, an ambulance too, and I'm put into the ambulance. I'm still not able to speak. They drive me to the hospital, but I'm physically okay. My dad walks in crying, and he's so happy to see me alive. This is real. I can't remember the last 6 days. What happened to me? How am I still alive? What did it do to me? I never got back to collect my things, and I never got an answer on what had happened that night. I'm never going into the forest again. I don't want to play with my second chance at life.